What's the craziest thing you've ever done? Story 1. I had a friend when I was in middle school whose mom would take care of me until my mom got out of work. We both had game cubes, except mine was a used one my parents got from a swap meet, and his was brand new, so I would take my controller and games to school so I could play with him afterward. Well, one day my GameCube stopped working. I do not know what was wrong with it. I was 11 and did not know about troubleshooting at all. The next day happened to be the same day we were moving houses, and I was being transferred to a different school. Well, I got the not-so-brilliant idea of taking my GameCube to school. My friend and I had the same color GameCube, so right before my mom picked me up, I quietly switched our GameCubes. We said our goodbyes since this was the last time I ever saw him, and I left. He had no way to contact me since I moved to a new city, a new school, got a new house telephone number, and everything else. So here I am almost 15 years later with the same GameCube I stole from my friend. I have tried looking for him on Facebook to apologize and pay him back or replace it, but with no luck. To this day, I still think about it whenever I play Melee or Double Dash. Story 2. When I was in high school, there was a girl who was just genuinely awful to me. I never knew why. I do not think I had ever done her wrong, but day after day, there she was in all her nastiness. So on this particular day, she was saying really cruel things, and I ignored it. Then I was standing in the quad with some of my friends, and she yelled at me, completely unprovoked, telling me to get out of her way in a very aggressive manner. It really made me angry. So as she started disappearing into a crowd of students, as a last-ditch effort to release some of my frustration, I took my gum out of my mouth and threw it at her. She was probably 20 to 25 feet away, so I just assumed it fell harmlessly to the ground. After I calmed down for about 1 to 2 minutes, I saw her again, but something was wrong. She was crying, and her friend was trying to comfort her. She walked about 6 feet away from me, and I was staring at her, genuinely confused, and then I saw it. Her entire head was a massive tangle of gum and tight brown curls. For about 3 seconds, I felt bad, and then I realized that for me to make that throw almost blindly into a crowd of people and have it land in the only place it possibly could have in such a catastrophically perfect way, I knew I had made the right choice. Story 3. When I was around 13 years old, my grandfather passed away, and we cremated him so that his ashes could be scattered into the Great South Bay on Long Island. My aunt had come up from Florida for the funeral, and after the services were over, the immediate family drove with the urn to the bay. We had all gotten out of the cars, and my aunt was reaching for the urn, which was in a box on the middle seat. When she lifted the urn, it broke, since it was a water-dissolving urn, and my grandfather's ashes spilled all over the seat and my aunt. Being 13 and always joking around and making fun of friends when they fell or did something foolish, I automatically shouted, "Ha, nice job." Realizing what I had just said, I froze with my hand over my mouth as my aunt turned to me with tears in her eyes and her father's ashes still on her hands. Story 4. I still feel absolutely dreadful about this, even though it happened over 10 years ago. Whenever I went out with this specific guy from work, named Jake, something bad always seemed to happen, and this was easily the worst. It was a Friday afternoon and I felt like having a beer. Nobody else was interested except for Jake, so we ended up at the local pub together. A couple of hours of drinking passed and we were both extremely drunk. As you would expect, after several hours of drinking, the time came when we both needed to use the restroom, so we left together and ended up at a urinal standing next to each other. Jake, in his infinite wisdom, decided it would be hilarious to urinate on me. He turned around, yelled to get my attention, and sprayed a long stream all over my fabric-toed shoes. Jake found this hilarious, while I found it absolutely disgusting. He quickly ran off while I was left to finish and calculate my revenge. I zipped up and turned around to leave when I saw someone bent over near the sinks. With no time to think, I ran in and planted my urine-soaked toe with full force right into the middle of his backside, showing absolutely no restraint. The kick landed perfectly, directly between the cheeks, and the revenge felt more satisfying than I could have imagined. I was laughing and patted him on the back until I realized the person I kicked was not Jake at all. My heart sank and my jaw dropped. It was an elderly man wearing the same color clothes as Jake, who had been struggling to fasten his belt. I immediately started apologizing, asking if he was okay, and trying to explain the misunderstanding, but he could not say a word. He just grunted and waved me off, signaling for me to leave. By that point, I was completely pale, trying to process what had just happened, and I followed his instructions. Outside the restroom, Jake was standing there laughing about the whole incident until he noticed how serious I looked. We walked back to our table, and I explained what our behavior had caused. We were both speechless. After about 5 minutes filled with guilt, we came up with a plan to make things right, which involved finding the poor man I had kicked and paying for whatever he wanted to drink for the rest of the night. We walked around the pub for at least an hour trying to find him, but he was gone. I still feel like a terrible person, and I no longer go drinking with Jake. Story 5, I was at the park with my wife and my 4-year-old daughter, and we were there with another couple who had a 4-year-old son. The kids were both riding scooters. The little boy had been riding his scooter for a long time and used it a lot, so he was very confident in his skills. But my daughter had only gotten her scooter a few days earlier and was still nervous riding it. The little boy thought it was funny to ride his scooter fast, slam on the brakes, and gently bump into the back of my daughter's scooter. He did this 3 times, and my daughter got more upset each time. Each time I told him not to do it, using a progressively more stern voice, but he kept going. After the 3rd time, I looked him straight in the eyes and told him that if he did it again, he would regret it. The kid backed up about 20 feet and came straight at the back of my daughter's scooter at full speed. My parental instinct kicked in, and I put my foot firmly down about 1.5 feet behind my daughter's scooter, thinking it would scare him into veering away, but he did not have time to react and panicked while trying to stop. My foot threw off his timing, and instead of a gentle bump, the 4-year-old fell hard onto the concrete path, scraping both his hands and both his knees while yelling at me, asking what I was doing. I instantly felt terrible, and to make it worse, some people in the park had missed the earlier scooter incidents and only saw me cause a kid to fall, so I felt incredibly embarrassed. A few minutes later, after calming him down, both of his parents laughed and actually thanked me for teaching their kid a lesson, admitting he had been behaving badly. Story 6, I tried to break up with my high school sweetheart, who I had been dating for 6 years at the time, on the same day as our anniversary, which I had completely forgotten about. I did not have the heart to do it, so instead I took her out to dinner and then broke up with her the following weekend. I have always been terrible with remembering dates, and she never dropped any hints, but the relationship had gone on long enough and I was losing interest. I wanted to move on and explore new things, while she wanted to get married and settle down. It did not end there. About 2 or 3 years later, I looked her up to see how she was doing, hoping we could reconnect as friends. I knew the breakup had devastated her, and I had always felt guilty, so I wanted to apologize and at least make peace. It turned out she had never moved on and was still holding on to hope, so she immediately assumed we were getting back together. I then had to break her heart all over again by telling her that I did not want that and that I had only reached out to apologize and possibly be friends. I felt horrible for even attempting to reopen that door. Story 7. When I was a sophomore in high school, we had a career day where we went from room to room watching presentations by people in different job fields. I ended up going to the physical therapy presentation, which is where everything went wrong. The woman giving the presentation was talking about her work, and I was not paying much attention when she suddenly put on a video showing someone she had helped at her facility. The video started, and it showed a man with no arms or legs, only very short limbs. He rolled into view, and then a dramatic motivational song started playing. I immediately thought there was no way this was real, and then the man began doing extremely intense physical activities, including striking equipment with his head, rolling across the floor, and performing stunts meant to be inspiring. For reasons I still do not fully understand, I completely lost control and started laughing uncontrollably. I was crying from laughter in a crowded room full of classmates, and I was the only one doing it. I could not stop no matter how hard I tried. When the presentation ended, the realization of what I had done hit me, and I was absolutely mortified. For the rest of the week, people told me I was a terrible person and that I would be punished for it, and that career day still haunts me to this day. Story 8, I was dating a guy in high school who eventually became very abusive. And when I broke up with him, he started stalking me. He would show up at my workplaces and even come to my home late at night, standing outside my window and lingering around. I confronted him at school and told him he needed to leave me alone, but he refused. He continued following me to classes and leaving notes filled with messages about never leaving me and threatening to hurt himself if I did not come back to him. I was completely overwhelmed and did not know what else to do. Eventually, I moved a knife that he kept in his car into a clearly visible spot. I then told a school police officer that he was stalking me, which was true, and that he was threatening to hurt me using the knife in his car, which was not true, but the knife itself did exist. I took the officer to the car, where the knife was clearly visible on the passenger seat. As a result, my ex was suspended from school for most of the year, and after that, he finally left me alone. Story 9. Years and years ago, I traveled with some friends to a nearby city to hang out with people I did not know for a party. I ended up pretty bored because everyone else took substances, and I did not want to do that with a group of strangers. I sat around and had a few beers while most people stayed outside by a fire. A girl wandered in that I had not seen before. She was not my type at all, had a dark style, a bad attitude, and seemed generally unhappy. But she was sober and making fun of the situation, which honestly made the night more entertaining, so we talked for a while. It eventually got pretty late, and my friends and I were getting ready to leave, while they were still outside messing around. She turned to me and suggested we go upstairs together. I was young, impulsive, and thought this would be the highlight of the weekend, so I agreed. We went upstairs and hooked up briefly. After that, I went back downstairs and my friends came in from outside asking if we could leave, and we did. Before the girl even came back downstairs, we were already gone. The next day, I got a call asking if I had hooked up with her, and I denied it. I was told she was upset and saying I had been with her, and then left without saying goodbye. But my friends brushed it off and called her a liar, saying similar things had happened before and that people were tired of her stories. Not only did I hook up with her and leave without a word, I also lied about it afterward. And on top of that, others had apparently done the same thing to her before, which led to her friends no longer believing her. It is easily one of the worst things I have ever done, and I still feel awful thinking about it. Story 10. A close friend of mine got into a relationship for the first time in years with a man who did not deserve her. She fell deeply in love and ignored the fact that he was involved in serious criminal activities, including substances and weapons. She introduced him to me and a few other friends, and everyone warned her that he was bad news and that she should think carefully about the relationship. We had been extremely close, talking every day and spending a lot of time together, until she started dating him. After that, I only saw her 3 times, 2 of which he was present, and he behaved aggressively and possessively. I told her that I cared deeply about her and that she could always come to me if she needed help, but I also made it clear that I could not risk my own safety or that of my partner by being around people connected to criminal activity. About 4 months later, after no contact at all, I randomly ran into her, and she looked happy and healthy, so I assumed everything was going well. It was not. She told me he had been abusive, heavily addicted to substances, and had effectively kept her isolated for months by controlling her phone, forcing her to delete social media, and preventing her from leaving. She had broken up with him about a week before I saw her, which was why she was finally free. She filed a restraining order, and the police became involved. I still feel guilty for not being there more, even though I tried to support her in the ways I could. Everyone warned her from the beginning, but she just could not see it at the time. Story 11. I reported my boss to the tax authorities. I was 20 years old and working in a small family-owned restaurant, where I had been employed for about a year and a half. I was trying to afford community college, but because I was considered out of state, tuition was much more expensive. I had been living there for close to 2 years, but to qualify for in-state tuition, the school required tax records proving I was financially independent from my parents. The problem was that my tax form showed only a small fraction of what I actually earned, because we were all being paid in cash off the books. I contacted my parents' accountant, who filed my taxes based on my actual income using my bank records, even though the amount was still very modest. About 2 months later, government investigators showed up and shut the restaurant down. It turned out the income I reported was higher than the revenue the owners claimed, which raised a red flag. An investigation followed and revealed the owners had either falsified or failed to file business taxes for roughly 12 years. I was not trying to destroy their livelihood. I just wanted affordable tuition, and I believed they would have been caught eventually anyway. I did, however, speed up the process. Story 12. When I was a freshman in high school, my brother and I had just gotten an Xbox 360 for Christmas, and Halo 3 was my prized possession. Since I had to share the console with him, I would sneak it into my room at night and play Halo almost all night, even on school nights. Because of that, I was extremely sleep-deprived and in a terrible mood. One morning we walked to the bus stop, which was actually located at an elementary school, where my brother, his friend, and I ran into a kid who started insulting us, mostly targeting my brother and his friend by calling them names. I could see them getting visibly upset, and since I was exhausted and already irritated, I told the kid to back off. Instead, the kid grabbed at my chest, mocked me, and said something sarcastic, and at that point I completely lost control. I went into a blind rage, started fighting him, and shouted every curse word I could think of while it was happening. It went on for what felt like a minute or two before the elementary school principal showed up with her second-grade students and broke it up, clearly shocked that I was hitting a smaller kid and swearing so loudly in front of young children. When I got to school afterward, the reality of what I had done set in, and I felt embarrassed about my language and anxious about the trouble I knew I was in. I was immediately sent to the principal's office and told I would be suspended for 3 days, which was the first time I had ever been suspended or in serious trouble. I sat silently in the office, staring at nothing, listening to the clock tick until my mother picked me up. She did not speak to me in the car, and when we got home, I went to my room and lay in bed in silence for about an hour until she came in and asked what I was doing. I told her I was punishing myself, and she asked why, then said that I stood up to a bully and told me to go do whatever I wanted while she went to pick up lunch. I do not think my parents had ever been prouder of me than they were in that moment. Story 13. When I was around 13 or 14 years old, I was babysitting my little brother, who was about 6 at the time. He had a mild cold, with a cough and a runny nose. Nothing serious. After my parents left, I went outside and made a very poor decision. And when I came back inside, I started playing a chasing game with my brother, where we ran around the dining room table in circles. At one point, he started coughing, which was completely normal given that he had a cold. But I suddenly became extremely paranoid and convinced myself that he was dying and could not breathe. I panicked and called emergency services. My brother was confused and terrified, and by the time the paramedics arrived, he was sitting calmly on the couch and perfectly fine. When my parents came home, I told them I had called because my brother was having trouble breathing and made it sound much more serious than it actually was. They told me I did the right thing and were glad I called. For years afterward, I worried that I had traumatized my brother, and I still remember the look on his face when I panicked and told him I had to make the call. How scared he looked and how he begged me not to. When he got older and went through his own phase of experimenting, I eventually told him the truth about why I had panicked so badly. He thought it was funny, but I still feel like it was one of my worst moments as an older sibling. Story 14. When I was 15, I was at a friend's house, who I will call Amy, and while I was waiting for her to get ready to go out, I started snooping through her room. I ended up finding her diary, and instead of putting it back where it belonged, I read it. In it, she had written about being intimate with a guy she barely knew, who also happened to be a close friend of another girl, who I will call Laura, and Laura and I were friends at the time. I did not know whether what I read was real or just wishful thinking. I wanted to know the truth, but I did not want to admit to Amy that I had read her diary, so I told Laura what I had read, and together we decided to call the guy. Instead of simply asking him, we told him that Amy was expecting a baby and that she had told us he was the father. We assumed he would laugh it off and not believe us, but instead he completely panicked, hung up the phone, and immediately told his mother. We did not let him believe the story for long, but the damage had already been done. He was furious, his mother was furious, and out of guilt we eventually told Amy what we had done. She was furious and deeply embarrassed. Over time we all became somewhat friendly again, but I do not think she ever truly forgave us. I never got the chance to make things right, because later that same year, Amy was killed in a car accident. That was over 20 years ago, and I still have not forgiven myself for what we did. Story 15. This happened about a year ago. I took photos of a beautiful girl I found online and created a fake dating profile using a false name and details. At the time, I treated it like a joke and chatted with people in my area without thinking about the consequences. I started talking to one man constantly, day and night, over the course of about 3 days, and he quickly became emotionally invested in the person I was pretending to be. During our conversations, he mentioned that he was a new professor at a school I had previously graduated from. I did not say anything because I did not want to expose the lie. Around the third day, he sent me a message saying how excited he was to meet me, but also how afraid he was that I would not like him in person. That message hit me hard because he was genuinely excited about someone who did not exist. I did not respond. I deleted the photos and removed the account entirely. A few days later, I logged into my old school email account, which I now only use for promotions and general messages. While searching for a discount code, I saw an email sent to the entire university about a memorial service for that same professor. Toward the end of the message, there were links to mental health resources. He had taken his own life. I think about it every single day. Story 16. When I was in college, I went to a party that had a keg, and I ended up in the basement with a group of people I did not know very well, including 2 girls I was trying, unsuccessfully, to talk to. Eventually, it became clear that my awkward attempts at conversation were not working, and their attention drifted elsewhere. Because I was 19 and very bad at handling alcohol, I leaned against a desk to steady myself and accidentally knocked over a lava lamp. No one seemed to notice, so I quietly walked away. Sometime later, one of the hosts came over to the 3 of us after seeing us standing together and said that he did not know who broke the lamp, but that if someone was drunk enough to break it, they probably needed to go home. The girls immediately protested, saying it was not them, but regardless, they were escorted toward the door. I stopped the host and told him that I did not know who broke the lamp either, but that I could help pay to replace it if needed. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me not to worry, saying he was pretty sure it was not me, and suggesting that I stay and grab another drink. I did exactly that, let them take the blame, and never replace the lava lamp. Story 17. I had recently broken up with my girlfriend, but we were still living together while we were both in the process of moving out and barely spending any time at the apartment. I was in my mid-20s at the time and finishing my final year of college, which had taken longer than expected because I worked and paid my own way through school. I was working at a local pet store and was not in a good mental place. During that period, I made a series of very poor decisions and started seeing a coworker who was far too young, something I deeply regret and would never justify. One night, after spending time at a friend's place drinking and playing video games, I went back to the apartment where my ex was also there, and intoxicated. She began apologizing for how the relationship had ended and for her behavior, likely reacting to the fact that I had moved on so quickly. One thing led to another, and it was only the next morning that I realized just how careless and irresponsible my choices had been the night before. Looking back, the entire situation fills me with shame, and it remains one of the lowest points of my life. Story 18. I worked for a large telecommunications company in a smaller city, and it was honestly a great job at the time. I was one of only a few men in an office, mostly made up of middle-aged and older women, and since I was in my early 20s, I was treated like the baby of the office. Almost everyone liked me, except for one coworker who constantly went out of her way to make my workday miserable. It was always small but aggravating things, like taking my notes or interfering with my calls, and it wore on me over time. Not long after the events of that year that changed everything, the company announced our office would be closing, giving us the choice to relocate to a larger city or take a severance package and leave. She chose to relocate, and I chose the severance. On the final day in the office, while everyone was distracted saying their goodbyes and heading to the break room for a free lunch, I noticed she had left her computer unlocked. Knowing the system tracked activity by user identification, I made a terrible decision and accessed several accounts I recognized, removing a few months of charges from their bills under her login. I quietly returned to my desk before anyone noticed. Months later, I learned that after relocating, she was questioned about those account changes and eventually lost her job over it. At the time, I felt a sense of satisfaction, but with hindsight, I recognize it was a cruel and disproportionate act of revenge. Story 19, I once pretended I had been in a car accident while running an errand for my boss so I could get the rest of the week off work. I was 19 and working my first corporate job as a summer intern. And although I was getting paid, the position was nothing like what had been promised, and I was completely miserable. One day, my boss sent me out to deliver advertising documents to other local businesses, a task I absolutely hated. So instead of doing it, I drove straight home. When my boss called asking where I was, I panicked and lied, telling him I had been in a car accident and needed to have my car towed. He was incredibly understanding and gave me the rest of the week off. To keep the story going, I drove my mother's car to work the following week so he would not suspect anything. He even took me out to lunch and was genuinely kind to me, which only made the guilt worse. To this day, it bothers me that one of the nicest bosses I have ever had was lied to simply because I could not stand the job. Story 20. This is honestly the most horrible thing I have ever done, and I have never truly confessed it. Even now, thinking about it still makes me cry, because I love animals and would never intentionally harm one. When I was 6 years old, we lived on a farm and had a lot of cats. All 4 of our female cats became pregnant at the same time, and each of them had 6 kittens. So suddenly we had 24 kittens, 4 adult female cats, and 2 male cats. Normally, our cats stayed inside the house, but with that many animals, it just was not possible anymore. We had a barn outside, and my dad decided that was where the cats would stay. It was not extremely cold at the time of year, warm during the day and chilly at night. And my dad set up the barn with a space heater, beds, and lots of blankets, so it was generally warm inside except near the door. The mother cats would often try to bring their kittens into the house. I knew this was not allowed because bringing one kitten inside would mean bringing the entire litter and the mother cat as well. When a cat brought a kitten to my window, I would gently pick it up, get on my bike, and ride it back to the barn, which was about a 3-minute ride. One night, around 11 at night, 6-year-old me was trying to sleep when I heard a kitten crying outside my window. One of the mother cats had left a kitten there. My dad was asleep and I did not want to wake him, so I got on my bike and took the kitten back toward the barn. I was terrified of the dark, and instead of bringing the kitten all the way inside to where the others were, I left her by the barn door, assuming the mother would hear her and come get her. I made it home safely, but the next morning when I went to check on the cats like I always did, I opened the barn door and saw the kitten, only a few weeks old, lying there lifeless. The mother had not come back, and the kitten had not survived the night near the door. I was completely devastated and missed 2 days of school because I could not stop crying. Story 21. I cannot believe I am even writing this, and it is something I deeply regret. When I was younger, my friends and I did stupid and cruel things without understanding the consequences. At one point, we would knock down large insects and try to make fake wings for them using toothpicks and paper. In an even worse moment of judgment, I decided to try something similar with a small lizard, thinking I could temporarily stun it without harming it. I used equipment I should never have touched and convinced myself it would be harmless. When it did not work, instead of stopping, I made increasingly worse decisions, believing I could somehow fix the situation. What followed was a series of actions driven by ignorance and panic that caused the animal severe suffering. Realizing that the lizard was badly hurt and would not recover, I made the terrible choice to end its life quickly, believing it would be painless. It was not. Watching the outcome left me completely horrified, and it is one of the very few things in my life that I genuinely regret to my core. It is also the only thing I have ever done that made me physically sick afterward. I think about it even now with shame and remorse, and I wish I could take it back. Story 22. This is going to sound horrible, but here it is. In high school, there was a girl who liked me a lot, far more than I was comfortable with, and she followed me around constantly. She annoyed me, my friends teased me about it, and I handled the situation very poorly instead of just being mature and kind. She even joined the track team because I was on it, which only made me feel more overwhelmed and frustrated. One day during lunch, I was sitting with my friends when she walked up to our table and started talking like nothing was wrong. In a moment of cruelty that I still regret, I stood up and loudly told my friends to watch me walk around the world in 5 seconds. I then walked in a circle around her and pretended to be exhausted from all the walking. She immediately ran out of the cafeteria. She never reported me, and I never got in trouble. My friends thought it was funny at the time, but looking back, it was a humiliating thing to do to someone who did not deserve it. Story 23. My mother married a deeply insecure and self-absorbed man who constantly made her feel excluded and unappreciated. And this story takes place when I was around 17 years old, several years into their marriage. He rarely laughed at her jokes and did little to make her feel valued. One weekend she asked if anyone wanted to go to the mall with her, but everyone wanted to sleep in or stay home, so she went by herself. A few hours later, she came back visibly excited because she had gotten a makeover at a cosmetics counter. The problem was that it looked awful. She normally did not wear makeup, and this was heavy and poorly done, and I could tell she had bought the products too. She walked into the house, asked what we thought, and no one said anything. There were several of us there, and instead of responding, we avoided eye contact. She waited quietly for a moment, then went into the bathroom and washed it all off. Not long after that period in our lives, she and my stepfather died in a car accident. That moment still haunts me, because now I understand it was not about the makeup at all. It was her asking, without words, if she was beautiful and mattered. I wish I had told her the truth kindly and reminded her of her worth. Story 24. During my senior year of college, I was taking 27 credits in order to graduate on time. I was keeping up with all of my classes, passing everything, and I still cannot fully explain why I made the decision I did. But 1 month before graduation, I plagiarized a paper for one of my elective courses. I used an online paper source and forgot to rewrite a single sentence, which was enough to get me caught. When I appeared before the Academic Integrity Committee, I lied and avoided the worst consequences. I was suspended for 1 semester, but I was still allowed to walk at graduation, took an online course elsewhere, and officially graduated later that year. What eats at me is that for 4 years before that moment, I never cheated, never took shortcuts, and never slacked off. In my final month, for no real reason, I threw that integrity away even though I was passing all 9 of my classes. To this day, it keeps me up at night because I feel like a fraud who does not deserve the degree, the job, or the life I have, all because of that one decision. Story 25. When I was in 8th grade, I sat in the back of the school bus, and there was a 7th grader who always tried to sit near us. We gave him a hard time because we believed only 8th graders belonged in the back. After months of this immature rivalry, there was one day when I stood up to briefly step off the bus before it departed, since there was still time. As I walked past him, he was carefully holding a large plastic bag in his arms, and I deliberately slammed into him. I heard a crunching sound, and he cried out in shock. I stepped off the bus and talked to a friend outside. When I got back on, I saw him sitting near the front, quietly sobbing. The bag was open, and inside was a completely ruined gingerbread house resting on his lap. I did not say anything because I did not want to draw attention or take responsibility. He looked at me with tears in his eyes as I walked past and returned to my seat in the back. He cried for the entire 15-minute ride and never tried to sit in the back of the bus again. Story 26. I went to an herb dispensary and was walking up to the door after parking my car when a rough-looking guy suddenly came around the corner, cut directly in front of me, and physically blocked me with his arm so he could get inside first, staring at me while doing it. I stepped back and let him go ahead to be checked by security. While he was being searched, he was extremely fidgety and dropped something on the ground, a folded piece of paper. I told him he dropped something, and he snapped at me loudly, telling me to step back and using aggressive language, then started joking with the security guard about me. I stepped back and ignored it. He went inside and I picked up the paper without looking at it. Inside the dispensary, I saw him talking to the employee and looking over at me again, laughing. I went about my business and noticed him later frantically checking his wallet and pockets as I was finishing up. After I left the building, I finally unfolded the paper and realized it contained $120. I briefly considered going back, but given how rude he had been and the fact that I was already home, I did not. Story 27. This is technically my friend's story, but it is too good not to tell. He went to see the movie Sucker Punch with his brother when he was around 16 years old, and his brother was a few years older. During the movie, his brother got up to get popcorn, and my friend decided it would be hilarious to hide near the walkway and scare him when he came back. He crouched behind a railing in the dark and waited. When he saw a man walking toward him, he assumed it was his brother and put all of his strength into an open-handed slap directly to the man's groin. The man collapsed in pain, yelling loudly, and my friend immediately realized it was not his brother at all, but a complete stranger. He ran back to his seat and prayed he had not been seen. When his brother returned, he whispered what had happened, and they struggled not to laugh as the injured man sat in the row in front of them, groaning in pain for the rest of the movie. That alone would have been bad enough, but the following week, the local newspaper ran a special editor's column where the editor described going to see a movie ironically titled Sucker Punch and being assaulted by an unknown attacker. My friend later learned the man still has that article framed in his home. Story 28. I am a little late sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. My best friend took me out for a pre-bachelor party night, and we drank heavily before even reaching the club, including about 4 liters of beer. We stopped to withdraw cash, and I ran into a convenience store to buy rum and cola, thinking I would have time to drink some before we arrived. I did not realize the club was just around the corner, so rather than paying expensive drink prices, I decided to drink the rum quickly and chase it with cola. Later on the way home, I felt thirsty and remembered I still had some cola left, so I drank it without thinking. It had been sitting in the car and was warm, which immediately made me sick. I vomited violently into his car, directly into the air vents. Then once I smelled it, I threw up again all over the seat, carpet, door, and center console. The car was only 3 days old. Back at his house, I drunkenly tried to clean it, but only managed to grind everything deeper into the upholstery. As if that was not bad enough, later that night I woke up with severe stomach issues and could not make it to the bathroom, so I used the trash can in his office, then cleaned it up without ever telling him. I have never told him the full truth, and to this day I feel ashamed and know I was a terrible friend that night. Story 29. When I was in 7th grade, there was a kid I strongly disliked. We had our 5th class of the day together, and I knew exactly where he sat every single time. I never saw him until that 5th class, and I also had the last 2 classes of the day with him. That 5th class was right before lunch, and after lunch ended, a friend of mine who also disliked him snuck back into the classroom with me. He stood watch at the door for teachers while I filled the kid's chair with glue. The plan was simple and cruel. When he stood up to leave, his khaki school pants would rip. We went to lunch, confident it would work. After lunch, we returned, and that is when everything went wrong. The kid I disliked was not at school that day. Instead, a brand new student sat in his seat on his very first day. The entire time I was panicking internally, hoping the glue had dried. The teacher announced the new student and asked him to stand up and introduce himself to the class. As he stood, I heard the unmistakable sound of fabric tearing. His pants ripped open along one entire side, exposing his underwear. The class burst out laughing and pointing as he stood there, nearly in tears. Someone even shouted a comment about seeing a stain, which made the laughter even worse. I felt absolutely horrible. I never admitted to the teacher or the principal that I was responsible, even though they suspected me because of my reputation. I did, however, spend some of my own summer money to quietly buy the kid a new pair of pants. It was the least I could do. He never found out it was me. Story 30. When I was in 5th grade in the early 1980s, a group of us used to chase a young girl who had immigrated to the United States from Russia. During recess, we would chase her across the large football field, corner her against the chain-link fence, and shout insults related to politics at her. It must have been terrifying for her. I did not personally hate her, did not know her at all, and did not even truly understand or care about the politics we were mocking. I simply joined the group because everyone else was doing it, even when a couple of other girls tried to intervene and protect her. As far as I remember, she was not physically harmed, but that does not excuse anything. What we did was cruel. She disappeared after that first week, and I assume her parents removed her from the school. I am deeply sorry for what we did, and I often think about her and hope she went on to live a good life. I do not believe we deserve forgiveness. In moments when I try to understand how it happened, I think back to how fear of foreign threats was constantly talked about by adults during that time, especially with the Cold War still ongoing. That atmosphere likely influenced us, but even then, I knew what we were doing was wrong, and I did it anyway. That truth still weighs on me. Story 31. When I was in 7th grade, I received an in-school suspension for repeatedly tripping other kids during recess and injuring one of them. On the day of my suspension, there was a major history exam that everyone was stressed about, but instead of taking it in class, I had to sit in the vice principal's office. I was around 13 or 14 at the time and made a very stupid decision. During the test, I pulled out my history book and started looking up answers right in front of the vice principal. I kept checking to see if she noticed, but she said nothing. When I came to a question I could not find in the book, I did something even worse and asked her to help me locate the answer. She sat there with me, flipping through the book, and actually found the answer and gave it to me. When the exams were returned later, I had received a perfect score. It was the highest grade in the class, and my teacher was extremely impressed. I still remember the looks on everyone's faces, how angry they were that I was the only one with a perfect score. Even now, I sometimes laugh about it, though I know it was completely wrong. Story 32. My former business partner embezzled so much money from our company that it completely collapsed. When I realized what he had done, I hid a small video camera in the office and confronted him directly. Instead of answering my questions, he went on a long rant, lasting about 10 minutes, where he talked about how much he hated people with disabilities and said that people like me, since I am physically disabled, should not exist for the good of society. After he stormed out, I retrieved the recording, and it was perfect. There was no doubt that he had stolen the money and no doubt about the hateful things he believed. After that, he was obviously out of a job. Knowing he worked in information technology like I did, I assumed he would start applying through recruiters and tech companies in the area. I sent the video to the main recruiting managers and to many software, support, and information technology companies nearby. At the time, my wife still had him as a contact on social media, and he would post messages asking for prayers to get hired at specific companies. Whenever she saw one, she would tell me, and I would send the video to that company as well. Despite having a 4-year degree and several expensive certifications, he eventually ended up managing a fast food restaurant. He has not tried to get another job in the field for years now, and I am likely done involving myself any further. Story 33. There was a girl in my grade who used crutches because she could not walk without them, and I had classes with her in middle school where she always seemed kind. By senior year, she wanted to ask someone to a school dance, possibly prom or another event where the girls did the asking. She tried to do it by slipping a message into a piece of gum and offering it to a boy, but he knew what was coming and refused. From what I later learned, she tried asking a few others as well, but they avoided it every time. At lunch one day, a friend of mine who was friends with her was texting her, and he was reading her messages aloud to the table, which is how we found out what was going on. I suggested he recommend one of my friends, who was kind but a bit socially awkward, thinking it might be nice for him to go to the dance. She immediately rejected the idea and said she did not want to because he was weird. Later that day, I realized I had left some things in the school library, which was connected to the main building by a long hallway over the road. I went to retrieve my things and saw her moving down the hallway toward me. It suddenly occurred to me that I might be the next person she planned to ask, so I ran past her, grabbed my belongings, and hurried back. As I was leaving, I saw she had changed direction and was heading toward the library, so I sprinted past her again, pretending I was late for class. After that, I avoided her in person and ignored her messages online. I feel a bit guilty about how I handled it, but I hope she never realized why. Story 34. One day after school in 9th grade, I skateboarded to the park on my way home to play basketball with some other kids from school. We left our backpacks and things near the playground while we played on the court about 20 meters away. As it got late, I realized I needed to head home, So I went to grab my stuff and noticed a small kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, had taken my skateboard and was playing with it in the sand. I walked over calmly and asked for my board back, explaining that it was mine and I needed to leave. He refused and claimed it was his now, then swung the board and hit me in the leg when I tried to take it back. I knew I could not actually hit a kid, so in a moment of very poor judgment, I grabbed a handful of sand, thinking I would toss it near him to distract him long enough to grab my board and leave. Somehow, whether he moved or I misjudged the distance, I ended up hitting him directly with the sand, hard enough that he fell over crying. I grabbed my board and went home, but later returned to the park after dinner, only to find several large family members of the kids searching the area for a teenager, matching my description. I immediately left and went straight home, genuinely afraid of what would happen if they found me. Story 35. During my sophomore year of high school, I had English with what everyone considered to be the worst teacher in the school. That said, the class was almost entirely essay-based, and writing had always come easily to me, so I could usually finish a 4-page paper in about an hour. Most of the class would take the full 2-week period to complete the same assignment and consistently scored lower than I did. I never openly bragged about my grades, but my essays were frequently used as examples of what the assignment should look like, complete with teacher comments, photocopied and handed out to everyone. One student decided this meant I was not just a teacher's favorite, but that I looked so much like the teacher that I could have been his son. In hindsight, he was not entirely wrong. For an entire semester, I endured his constant comments from the back corner of the room, repeatedly calling me the teacher's son in a mocking tone. I tolerated it longer than I otherwise would have because his father had passed away from cancer the previous summer. Still, there is a limit to what anyone can take. During the semester exam, which also happened to be the last test before winter break, I finished far earlier than everyone else since it was another handwritten essay. When I turned it in, the teacher enthusiastically commented that he was looking forward to reading it and wished me a good break. As I was about to leave, I heard the familiar comment one more time from the back of the room. At that point, I stopped, turned around, looked him directly in the eyes, and in the flattest voice I could manage said that at least it meant I had a father, then walked out. As I went down the hallway, I could hear the chaos erupt behind me, including someone remarking that I had completely destroyed him. He never spoke to me again for the rest of the year. Story 36. This is not the worst thing I have ever done, but it is still memorable. I was about 16 or 17 and dating my first girlfriend in high school. She was a year younger than me and took dance classes, was very flexible, and much shorter than I was. One day at my house, she joked that she could kick over my head and proved it easily. Wanting to respond, I said I could do the same since she was shorter than me, completely forgetting that I had zero flexibility. I put all my strength into the kick, aiming as high as possible, and instead kicked her directly across the face with full force. She went down instantly and lost consciousness. I screamed for my mother, who rushed in, confused and panicked as I tried to explain what happened. After a few moments, my girlfriend regained consciousness, and we called her parents to tell them what happened and ask how they wanted to proceed. I was convinced I was about to be punished severely, but instead they laughed, teased us about it, and continued to joke about it for years. Even long after we broke up, I still worked part-time for her mother during college, and it remained a story everyone laughed about. Story 37. I worked for a ticket sales company many years ago, and one day I took a call from a woman who was extremely rude and angry because a previous representative had hung up on her. She wanted tickets to a children's ice show coming to her town in a few weeks and needed around 8 seats, likely for a large group of kids. She repeatedly tried to use discount codes that did not exist and became more hostile each time I explained they were invalid. She insulted me, accused me of trying to cheat her, and continued berating me. After enduring the abuse, I made a terrible decision. I pretended to complete her purchase, entered her payment information, and gave her a fake confirmation number to present at the venue. To this day, I consider it one of the worst things I have done, because she likely showed up with her family expecting a fun night, only to find out the tickets were never real. Even though she treated me horribly, I still feel guilty knowing that children were probably disappointed because of my choice. Story 38. When I was newly married, my spouse and I were living in an apartment and enjoying what felt like perfect marital bliss, including tending a small garden together. There was a low-hanging plant where a bird built a nest and laid several eggs, and we had a lot of fun watching the mother bird come and go, caring for them. One day, a couple of the eggs hatched while a few were still unhatched. The following day, I found what I believed to be the mother bird lying dead on the ground near the nest. The tiny hatchlings were still in the nest, moving around and waiting to be fed, and I assumed they would either starve or be taken by something else. Believing I was doing the humane thing, I made a terrible decision and removed the nest contents so they would not suffer. I felt awful, but told myself it was for the best. When I went to get water to clean up afterward, I heard frantic chirping, and to my horror, the mother bird appeared, very much alive, hopping around and searching the nest for her babies. I realized too late that the bird I had found earlier was not the mother at all, and that many birds can look similar. That moment still haunts me. Story 39 years ago, during spring break, I was at a massive St. Patrick's Day celebration where the streets were packed with people moving between bars, all carrying drinks. I desperately needed to use the restroom, but the lines were impossibly long and it was nearly impossible to move through the crowd. My friends formed a circle around me so I could discreetly relieve myself into an empty cup we had. Afterward, I was left holding a warm, foamy liquid that unfortunately looked just like beer. Instead of immediately getting rid of it, I carried it with me. A short while later, as we pushed through the crowd, we passed a group of women heading the opposite direction. One of them was holding an elaborate drink with decorations, and when we made eye contact, I asked what she was drinking. She enthusiastically told me and offered me a sip, which I took. Without thinking it through, I then offered her a sip from my cup, and she took a large swallow. She immediately reacted and spit it out, commenting that it was warm, and I jokingly replied that it was how the Irish drank it. The crowd separated us instantly, and we never saw each other again. I continued carrying the cup for a while longer, and later, in a drunken moment, I even convinced someone it was beer and sold it for a small amount before quickly leaving. To this day, it remains one of the most shameful and bizarre things I have ever done. Story 40. When I was about 10 years old and my brother was around 6, we were obsessed with medieval and fantasy games and movies, and our outdoor play often involved very bad ideas. One of our favorite games involved throwing wooden sticks at each other, inspired by video games we played. One day we found some very old wooden baseball bats in the garage, ones my father had used when he was younger. They were extremely heavy, especially for my brother. Almost immediately we decided to have a mock sword fight with them. I tried to be careful because I was older and stronger, mostly blocking his swings instead of attacking. At one point he swung the bat overhead with as much strength as he could manage, aiming toward my chest. I raised my bat in time to block, but the force of the impact caused his bat to rebound uncontrollably. It flew back and struck him squarely on the forehead. He began screaming, and my father ran outside to see my brother on the ground crying while I stood there holding a bat, completely panicked. Before my brother could even calm down enough to explain what happened, I was punished, and the whole incident is still burned into my memory. Story 41. This is honestly one of the worst things I have ever done, and I still think about it with shame. When I was in 7th grade, I used to walk to school with a friend. There was another kid named Austin who lived up the street and rode his bike to school. One morning as we were walking, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A bike going down the hill and crashing hard. For reasons I still cannot fully explain, neither my friend nor I immediately processed that it was a serious accident or that we should help. We turned the corner, and my friend suddenly asked if I heard a sound. I listened and realized it was quiet sobbing. That is when it hit me that the crash we saw had been Austin, and that he was hurt. For a brief moment, I knew we should go back. But then I thought about school, a test I had that day, and how I did not want to be late. I told my friend it was probably nothing, and we kept walking. Later, I found out how badly hurt Austin really was. He had severe facial injuries and needed extensive dental and reconstructive medical treatment. He had to drag himself, bleeding badly, to several houses before someone answered and called for help. He never knew that I had hurt him and chosen to walk away, although somehow other kids seemed to know. mentioning it casually without ever confronting me. Austin eventually recovered, but even now, years later, I feel sick thinking about that moment and the choice I made. Story 42. When I was around 10 years old, there was a girl at my school whose mother was also a teacher there. She acted like she ruled the place and treated other kids badly, including me. One day during sports day, we were standing in line to get water, and she was being especially unpleasant. I was in front of her, and when I got my drink, I turned around and deliberately pretended to trip, spilling the water all over her while making it look completely accidental. She burst into tears and ran to her mother, who came over to see what happened. I apologized repeatedly and explained that it was an accident, and because I had made it look convincing, other kids backed me up. Her mother told her she was overreacting and that accidents happen. The girl stormed off, and I received praise from other kids for standing up to her. After that, she toned down her behavior. I know this story fits the theme of bad things people have done, but even now I do not really feel guilty about it. Story 43. When I was 15 and my younger brother was 9, we were at a public swimming pool with several large water slides. He had a bad habit of standing up at the bottom of the slide while people were still coming down. I warned him twice to stop because someone could get hurt. The next time we went down, he did it again, and as I came down behind him, I grabbed his leg out of frustration. He fell forward hard, hitting the slide, and when he stood up in the pool, I saw two small white objects splash into the water in front of him. He went under the water and stayed there longer than expected, and I panicked, thinking he might be unconscious. I pulled him out of the pool, and that is when I saw blood coming from his mouth and realized his two front teeth were gone. I dove back in, found both teeth, and climbed out just as lifeguards rushed over because of his screams and the amount of blood. We went straight to a dentist who tried to repair the damage, but it did not fully work, and my brother ended up with two permanent replacement teeth. Even though I know not all of his dental issues were my fault, I still carry a lot of guilt over that moment and what it caused him. Story 44. When I was a freshman in high school, there was a senior who shared a couple of classes with me. He was exactly what you would expect, arrogant, loud, and very full of himself, especially around younger students. He loved showing off his money, particularly after he started selling sodas to students who were not allowed to leave campus, since freshmen had to stay on school grounds. One of his favorite things to brag about was his handheld gaming console, which he always carried with him. One day when he was being especially irritating, he left his backpack wide open with the device sitting right on top. I waited until he was distracted, then took it and slipped it into my pocket. At the time, I had a bad habit of pickpocketing friends as a joke to teach them not to leave valuables exposed, but I usually gave their things back. This time I did not. Instead, I sold it to a friend. The guy eventually bought a new one and moved on, and I did not feel guilty at all until after he graduated, and I got older and finally developed a conscience. Story 45. I was in a long-term relationship that I had slowly become disillusioned with for reasons that now feel immature and poorly thought out. I listened to the wrong people, let their opinions influence me, and decided to move in with a friend and end the relationship. The worst part is that I broke up with her through instant messaging. It took a while for the reality of how awful that was to sink in, but eventually it did. I apologized and we started talking again, and I genuinely wanted to fix things and try once more. Unfortunately, more problems followed, not all of them caused by me, but there was stress, family issues, and poor communication. I kept making mistakes and hurting her again and again. At some point, I became very aware of how much damage I had done and how much I disliked the person I had become. For a while, I tried to compensate by helping other people, convincing myself that doing good deeds could somehow balance out the harm I had caused. Eventually, I realized that growth does not work that way. While I still struggle to forgive myself for what I put her through, I do understand that people change over time. I am not perfect now, but I do believe I am no longer the same person I was then. Story 46. This is something I still think about, even though it happened about 8 years ago. Right after high school, I worked at a video game store that was connected to a video rental shop, both of which no longer exist. We used to get constant phone calls from one regular customer asking whether certain games were available or if specific used titles had come in. Even when we told him we had what he wanted, he rarely ever showed up.